how's it going? My name is Abdullah. I'm one of the group members for our project for the takeaway. The film we chose was The 13th. Um, it was a pretty interesting film. It did have a lot of topics in it that we're going to discuss today. From the persecution of young black men in America and how the roots of racism, even though people said slavery ended, it we can still see it in our society today. And I'm gonna give it over to my group member here.
Hi, I'm Aja Duplessis. I'm person two in this group. The 13th was very emotional for me. At the end of it, I just bawled, honestly, just about the injustices within the United States against Black people and people of color, honestly, that's been going on for centuries. And it just revealed that it's still going on to this day. And I'm excited to talk with my group member about it and get into
All right. I think we should probably start off sharing our initial reactions. 13th really covered a lot of history and connected the dots between slavery, segregation, and mass incarceration. What stood out to you the most?
it. For me, it was how directly the film showed the 13th Amendment as a loophole for slavery to continue. I mean, I had always thought slavery was something that ended in 1865. But this documentary just made it clear that it just changed form, honestly. The idea that could be imprisoned, the idea that people could be imprisoned and forced to work for freely, legally under the amendment, it was something that I hadn't really fully processed before. So it was very interesting to see.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think a lot of people really assumed that after slavery ended, that Black Americans could put it behind them and totally forget about it. But it's actually the opposite of that. A lot of racism is rooted even in today's society. You can go back to the 90s or the 80s during the crack epidemic where they would mainly target black communities. And then not just that, was they put them in jail, how you said there's that loophole of the 13th Amendment, and how they would kind of just abuse that, I wouldn't say power, but those rules that they instilled themselves into the system.
Yeah, I agree. And even though I knew that incarceration affected Black people, just seeing the numbers laid out like that, learning that the U.S. had 5% of the world's population, but
Mhm.
only 20% of its imprisoned population. And the documentary mentioned that in 1972, the prison population was actually at 300,000. And now, as of today, in the US alone, it has like 2.3 million. The US has the highest rate of incarceration. I was just completely mind blown by that. It's super unfortunate to hear.
Yeah, that is a pretty crazy number to hear. It really makes you basically question everything. Like, is the U.S. supposed to be about freedom? Why do we imprison more than any country in the world? And especially, why are we imprisoning mostly Black and Latino out of everybody in the world?
Mm, it's unfortunate. So just moving along, let's talk more about the 13th Amendment itself.
Hmm.
The documentary focused on a lot on the loophole and slavery is abolished, except for as a punishment for crime. So what did you think about that?
Right. I agree. I think that the phrase is the foundation of everything else we see in the film. That loophole that gave white politicians and business owners a way to keep exploiting black laborers even after slavery ended. It's not a coincidence that right after the Civil War, southern states started passing these black codes that made it super easy to arrest black people for things like loitering or not even having a job, basically nothing, just targeting them.
Right. And once they were arrested, they were leased out to private companies and forced to work, basically like enslaved people again. The film showed how convict leasing was just as brutal as slavery. People were beaten, overworked, and even killed. And it was just the South and I believe northern states also found ways to criminalize Black people so they can use them for prison labor.
Yeah,
So it
that
was,
that really was disturbing to me. It kind of did make me a little emotional seeing that happen. The criminal justice system was never really about justice. It was more about them maintaining racial control. And even today, prisons rely on free labor. That's how they run. That's how they make their money. Companies really just use prisoners to manufacture goods for pennies. It's just modern day slavery with a different name.
yeah, that part of the documentary like really stuck out to me. And I was that was the first time I even really heard about that. So I was super surprised to hear that just corporations were, use prisoners to manufacture goods for criminals. So let's fast forward to the 20th century. This idea of using criminal justice system to control Black communities, it didn't stop after the 1800s. And what I love is that the film talks about the war on drugs and how it really was about people having Black and Latino people. So what did you think about that section of the documentary?
It was pretty infuriating. I mean, when Nixon's own advisors admitted that the war on drugs was designed to disrupt black communities instead of help them, it just confirmed what we already knew. It wasn't about stopping crime. It was really about keeping black people in prison out of power to prevent them from being put in those places of power to actually create real change and reform.
Yeah, and what I believe is that, the documentary really shows how Reagan took it to another level. The documentary showed how his administration actually introduced mandatory minimums, which meant that judges can give harsh sentences, even for like nonviolent drug offenses. And then there was the like crack versus I believe cocaine sentencing.
Yeah.
Crack was more common in Black communities or Black neighborhoods, and they ended up having way harsher penalties than powdered cocaine, which was like used more by white people. And white people were getting a slap on the wrist for the same drug, where Black people were getting longer, more harsher sentencing. So that was very eye opening, actually.
Yeah, that part definitely did stick with me. It's not just black people were using crack more, it was that the government made sure the punishment was way worse for them and, in a way, targeting them to give out that punishment. And I mean, even though the crime rates weren't actually going up, the media made it seem like black communities were just out of control and it was somewhere you didn't want to be. I mean, that's when we started hearing terms like super predator, which made people think black teens were just naturally violent and that you didn't want to be around them and they were dangerous and a threat to any community out there. But it really wasn't the truth. They were just young black men. I wouldn't even put a color to it. They were just young men, just like anybody else.
Mhm. Yeah, and those policies didn't just affect the people who got locked up, they affected entire families. Millions of Black fathers were taken away from their children, which created cycles of poverty and trauma that still exists to this day.
Yeah,
Um, it's just so unfortunate that.
yeah, I totally agree. It's a really sad topic to look at. You know, it was pretty emotional looking at throughout the documentary how humans treated other humans that way just because they're not from their society or their community, you know. But
Yeah.
I think we should go into talking about the private prisons. The documentary really showed and went deep into how mass incarceration really became a business and a big part of the American economy. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are it's like absolutely sickening. The idea that corporations make money by keeping people in prison, it just explains why we have so many people locked up now. Private prisons actually make deals with the government to guarantee a certain number of prisoners. So they actually need more people to be arrested to make profit, which in turn affects, you know, Black communities, our people
Yeah.
of color communities. So, and it's just like brings on generational trauma, honestly.
Yeah, and just as bad as it's happening in prisons, I mean, believe it or not, It's not just private prisons. A lot of industries depend on private prison labor. Big companies like even Walmart, I was surprised by that one too, use prisoners
Mm.
to make everything from furniture to military gear and then pay them next to nothing. I mean, it's literally like modern day slavery, you could say, just in a different form. And most people don't even realize it. That's the sad part.
Yeah, I was super surprised to hear about Walmart, and I think they even also mentioned like FedEx and big farm companies as well. They all benefit from having people enslaved. So it's super sad. And I think that the policies that I think about the policies that come from this when you have corporations like lobbying for harsher sentences. It's not about justice; it's about money, and that's why the U.S. has so many people serving life sentences for nonviolent crimes. I mean, they touched on it a lot throughout the documentary. Even one lady, I forgot her name. I wish I would have wrote it down, but she was sentenced to life for just possession of cocaine, like just,
Mhm.
and that was her first offense.
Yeah,
So it was completely just, it's
yeah.
just
It's
wrong.
just so sad how many stories there are of a lot of people like that that had a whole life ahead of them. They made a small mistake, and I mean, who's to say we don't all make mistakes just in a different way?
Yeah,
And just because of how ruined and corrupt this system was, their life was over as they knew it just because of that one small mistake they made at a young age, or even an old age. We all make mistakes, and the system was set up against them from the start.
from the start, absolutely, I
Um,
completely agree.
but the film really did do a great job connecting all of this history to the present. What are some modern examples that show how systemic racism is still alive in our justice system? What do you think?
One thing that really stood out to me was voter suppression. The film talks so much about how millions of people with felony convictions can't vote. I'm sorry. That's a direct way to silence Black voices in politics, just like they did during Jim Crow. Jim.
One thing that definitely stood out to me was voter suppression. The film really talked about how millions of people with felony convictions can't vote, and that really was a direct way to silence black voices in politics, just like they did during Jim Crow. And
Mhm.
I I really do believe little things like that is what prevented from changing the corruption in the system and how it was basically rooted up against black communities. Because if they can't become a part of those communities, become parts of power, or not even power parts where they can create a change, it's gonna stay the same.
Absolutely.
And I also wanted to get into the school to school prison pipeline. It really was another big issue. Um, Black students were also more likely to be suspended or arrested at school for things that white kids really just got detention for, slap on the wrist, like you said earlier.
Mhm.
I mean, that really just starts pushing them into the system at an early age, just in a different way, but it's the same concept.
Yes, absolutely. I completely
Um,
agree with
and you can tie all of this back to the impact on black families and communities. This is all devastating consequences for them. I mean, families were so torn apart because so many black men were arrested, and once they got out, they were still punished for it. They would have a felony on their record. Nobody would hire them. And if they can't get hired, they're going to be having to make money somewhere. It's basically pushing them back into the system to do something bad just to survive.
Yeah, I have so many, just touching on that, like I have so many, I know people that were imprisoned, and when they got out, they were had a hard time finding a job. They were forced into the workforce without any
Yeah,
proper like rehabilitation or given any resources to use like once they get out, because you get out now you have a felony on your record, and a lot of companies don't hire felons,
yep,
so now it's like hard to get a job. So now it's kind of like some people are forced to do the thing that was making them money to begin with. Like for instance, they may return to doing some illegal things for profit,
yeah.
which makes them go right back to jail,
Mhm.
So the system is just already set up
Yeah.
against them, honestly.
Yeah, I
Um,
definitely had a few close friends that went through that. And I mean, some of them were lucky enough to get an opportunity somewhere where someone believed in them, believed they were a good person, and the system was up against them, you know. But I mean, a lot of them didn't. And I mean, what choice do they have at the end of the day? You can't really blame them. I mean,
yeah,
they're being set right back into the system, and it's not even the jobs. That's all. They were still punished for life. They couldn't vote. We talked about the jobs. They're basically treated like second class citizens.
absolutely. And another thing they touched on in the documentary is that they they're unable to get housing too. Like they're unable
Yeah.
to get because a lot of housing, like if when you apply for housing, you can't have any felony convictions.
Hmm.
So now where are you going to live? And also they touched on like you can't get food stamps either. Apparently, if you have a felony, you can't get food stamps. So you literally can't do anything. Like it's like you were
Yeah.
punished. They touched on this in the documentary. It's like you were punished but then you still have to be punished. Even you serve the crime, you serve the time for the crime, and
Hmm.
then you get punished for that same crime
Yeah.
for the entirety of the remaining of your life.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it affects families. Yeah, so that really hit home for me. Um, but another part of the story that really stuck out for me was the Khalees Browder story.
Oh
Khalees
yeah.
Browder, he was arrested at 16 years old for allegedly stealing a backpack, but he spent 3 years in Rikers Island without trial because he refused to take the plea when he did nothing wrong. So he stood
Yeah.
firm on not taking the plea.
Yeah. That case was really heartbreaking because he truly was innocent. I mean, me personally, I don't know if you do the same thing. I mean, if I'm innocent, I'm not going to take a plea deal when I'm guilty, even if it would give me less time. So I totally agree with why he did that. It's really heartbreaking. Um, but he was actually beaten in prison, put in solitary confinement, and ultimately took his own life 2 years after he was released. So that system really messed up his whole entire life. Very young boy, 16, lost his life at 18.
Yeah, I saw on documentary. I just had to kind of close my eyes when they showed clips
Yeah,
of being actually beaten and being jumped, and he was just running away from them. And they even showed how the guard in jail. Like you're a child, you're a kid, and you're put into jail with all these violent criminals, and all you did was be accused of stealing a backpack, which is a non-violent offense.
yeah,
So you spend 3 years in jail in solitary confinement, and I can't imagine just being somewhere so young with four walls, like no windows, just a bed, and it's just like I can't imagine how like much of a toll that took on his mental health.
mm, yeah,
And no, he knew you were innocent, and he even said that he didn't want to take the plea because he didn't do anything. Like
yeah.
he, that would be giving them their way, and now he's going to have his record for something that he didn't actually do. So I just feel like
Yeah.
they didn't do enough to protect them, and they just saw another black man. Um, they just saw another black man, and they're just like, "Yeah, you did it." Yeah. So yeah, like didn't take into account. Okay, well, he is a kid, but not also think about like how would they have treated a white 16-year-old? Would they have thrown them in jail for 3 years for stealing a backpack? And he didn't have any money to get bonded out either. So that's another reason why he
Mhm.
had to stay in jail. But another case that the 13th really emphasizes is Trayvon Martin. He was just 17 years old, unarmed, and was killed by George Zimmerman in 2012. George Zimmerman was able to use the stand your ground law to justify his actions, and he was eventually acquitted.
Yeah, that case I remember at the time, yeah, it was everywhere, and it's honestly just unbelievable how all that just happened, and how Zimmerman in a way just got away with it. And it actually reminded me about in the documentary, it revealed that ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, I believe, was
Mhm.
directly involved in pushing stand your ground laws across the entire country. They're a powerful lobbying group where corporations literally write laws and benefit from them and pass them on to politicians for their own benefit, not to benefit the citizens, to benefit themselves.
Yeah, and I'll touch on Alec after, but I just want to share part of my story, which kind of correlates with Trayvon Martin. This part of the 13, it really hit me because I remember when the not guilty verdict was read in July of 2013, I believe.
Mm,
I was actually in Orlando, Florida, and Florida is where it
yeah,
took place.
yeah.
I was on vacation with my family, and we were in a car as the verdict was being read. And I remember just driving down. We were passing like a few bars and stuff, and people were watching the trial. And when the not guilty verdict was read, people were actually cheering, like you heard,
Oh
yeah,
wow,
like
that's
clapping, cheering,
disgusting.
cheers, like with the drinks and stuff. People were cheering after George
Oh,
Zimmerman acquitted for killing a
that's
17
so
year old
disturbing.
young man. Like I was devastated. It made me
Yeah.
realize differently people saw Trayvon Martin's life. Like he didn't matter, and he was just a kid. Like just
Yeah.
imagine if it was a white person and they were killed just
Oh
for
yeah.
no.
A whole
Would
different narrative.
would y'all still be cheering and yeah, good, like clapping? This young man,
That's so devastating and honestly disgusting that
yeah,
people would have that type of reaction to anyone being killed and being murdered in cold blood like that, and cheering that the person that did it got away with it.
yeah,
That's just disturbing and disgusting.
it was absolutely disgusting. And I just remember bawling and crying, and
Yeah.
all of my entire family was. We were just so emotional. We just sat in silent for a very long time.
Mm,
It was just unbelievable that he was
yeah.
able to walk away and
Yeah.
still is able to live his life. And Trayvon Martin's life was taken away at such a young age. He wasn't able to go to college and live off his dreams. And he was a great kid. I remember his mom and his brother just saying how great of a person he was and how he was super ambitious and had dreams of just about just like how to fix the mass incarceration. Like, what do you think we should do about that?
I feel like first of all, we need to end private prisons. They're just benefiting off of it. There's no reform in there. They they do the system in a way where they come out even after they serve their sentence, and they're living a life that's just going to lead them right back into jail. So there's no reform there. It's just benefiting these people that own these private prisons for this slave labor, I will say. There's no reasons companies should profit from locking people up. Uh, we also need to reform sentencing laws. No one should be imprisoned for decades over a nonviolent offense. That's what I believe.
Yeah, I completely agree. Um, it's like even just when I think about like prison reform and things like that, there needs to be a lot more done
Mm-hmm.
when people are let out of prison as well. Like they need to be given more resources and um, it don't just need to be if you spent 20 years for a crime they just let you back out on the street. Like there needs to be some type of program while they are serving their sentences, like
Yeah.
mental health programs that they can use, and like having some sort of a buddy system maybe to so somebody can not so
Yeah.
much like probation officer but like just to help them find resources like once they get out because it's just it's just unfortunate. A lot of people go back to doing the same thing if they're not given any resources to help them on why they were in jail in the first place.
Yeah.
Um, but I completely agree. We need to invest in communities instead of prisons.
Hmm.
Crime happens because of poverty, lack of education, and like I stated, just the lack of mental health care. If we focus on those things instead of just locking people up, I believe we'd see a real change
Yeah.
in the society.
I definitely
Um,
agree.
yeah,
It's a definitely doable, but it can't just be one person that thinks like this. Everyone has to be on that type of path of reform and kind of fixing how we do things in our society and actually helping people reform from that life of crime or that life of violence, and slowly introducing them back into the community, not just throwing them in a privately owned prison where they're just going to be working for cents on the dollar, if even that, and most of the time, not even that, and basically just giving them an experience to where they want to go back into society and do good by others for what they did, if that
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
do you have any final thoughts on something that stuck with you from the 13th?
Yeah, for me, it was just realizing how much of our criminal justice system is built on racial control. It's not about keeping people safe. It's about maintaining power. And also,
Yeah.
we were talking about when they discussed how like politicians and presidents would use the war on crime or violent offenses as their way to
Oh
win a
yeah.
party.
Uh huh.
Like was that really stuck out to me.
It's
And
like
from
they're using people's actual problems as a manipulation tactic to gain power. And once they're in power, they don't do anything about it.
absolutely, and just how how the media played a part in it as well. For me, the media played a pretty big part
Hmm.
in how people of color were viewed to white people, and it put a lot of fear in white people's heart because of, I believe, the media. Like you said earlier, they labeled us as super predators, which like put a fear in people's heart, and
Yeah.
it just did a great job at the film did a great job at just showing all the injustices that black people face or people of color face from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
Um, and I also just want to say that Ava DuVernay did an amazing job at directing and producing and writing this documentary. I believe she's extremely talented, and she's directed and produced some amazing films like Selma and When They See Us, which is about the Central Park Five, which they did touch on
I
in the
did
documentary.
see that movie. That documentary slash movie was very, very good, very informational, and really like gave you a sense of what those poor boys were going through. And
Yeah,
it's sad because it happens over and over again. There's not a
absolutely.
documentary about every single one that happened. It happens a lot in our country, and I'll tell you, it's still happening to this day.
It's absolutely still happening to this day, but they did an amazing job. Ava did an amazing job with this film, and also everybody that also took part in it. Like everybody was so informative, and at the end, like I said at the beginning, with this discussion, like I just bawled, I cried. It was just so emotional, heartbreaking.
Yeah,
That also made me think about like what I can do to make a change, or what I can do into my community to make a change. So definitely looking
I
into
agree.
that. But no, overall, amazing film, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone
All right.
to watch.
Well, thank you for coming along for the discussion. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was such a great, like, it was so amazing to talk to you, and I feel like we had a lot of similar
I
viewpoints on
agree. Yeah,
it.
yeah. Just kind of how that the documentary. I feel like it was we picked the best one that
Yeah,
really portrayed what happened with these poor black people in American history, and it just tied it together so well, and it just made it so much easier to gather in that information and be able to talk about it.
absolutely.
Well, thank you guys for whoever's gonna be watching this, the professor.
Thank
uh,
you.
Thank you so much.